level, they gelled, they were like their choices were smart. And then they leave the room and the creative team will look at each other and go, oh, he was great, but we already cast the woman he's playing opposite and they just wouldn't jive well, or like the heights are different or something silly. And that actor who left the room will never know why he didn't get that part. And so if you make it a kind of pass fail based on whether you got the audition, it's not based in reality, because the reality is everyone in that room loved that person's work. I will say I got called in for an audition for this new play, Black Tom Island, and I was called in for this spunky young Slovakian immigrant. And I read the play and I was like, oh, this is so cool. But I got this audition and my brain went, why? How did I get this audition? I didn't email anyone for it. I didn't know anyone in the team. My brain went, how? I mean, it looks cool. I definitely think I could play this part, but where did it come from? And I went in for the audition. I got called back. I booked the show. And it wasn't until rehearsal that I found out that the in-house casting director had been a casting assistant at a different theatre. And 2 years earlier, I had gone on for a play for that theatre. I didn't even get a call back. I keep a journal of all of my auditions. So I knew that. I like looked it up afterwards. But I went to this audition 2 years earlier, didn't get a call back, didn't get the job. But when I left the room, that casting assistant was like, I like her work, and put my headshot resume in a folder. And so then when they were looking for a specific project, they pulled out my headshot resume later. And so what I'm saying is kind of good work begets work. I had a show like 2 years ago. I was in final callbacks for this off-Broadway play and I really wanted it. And I thought I had already been in for the director and the head casting. It was just for the producers. And I found out I didn't get it. And a week later, the director called me and she was like, just want to reach out. We went in a different direction, but I'm directing this workshop and would you be a part of that? And then that workshop became a show. And then we've worked together on 5 different shows. And again, came out of me not getting a job. So I would say often the aim in an audition isn't necessarily even like that job. It's forming a relationship and it's sharing a story. I think the cool thing about auditions in a way, if you're a painter, you can grab a palette and some paints and you can create your art right there. As actors, you often have to wait for someone else's yes. You need a director to say yes, a casting director to say yes, so you can sign on to a project. But an audition, you go in that room, it's your 2 minutes to do your monologue, do your scene, to tell your story without anyone having to give you a yes to do so. And I would say if you invest in an audition as a creative experience, like we all, we're actors because we love sharing stories. That's why we're here. And an audition, you ultimately get to do that. And I think if you come in with that mindset, one, it's so much more fun and fulfilling for you. But I think it reads in the room too. And it's definitely a skill set in itself and takes getting used to. But I would say celebrate it as a chance to tell a story. A lot of people, when they audition, they stand on that imaginary X in the middle of the room and present their work. I would suggest play with your space, create a 3-dimensional world. It will make you stand out from everyone else standing there presenting, but it also is just more fun because you get to like actually act versus just like audition. And I would say that also auditions are a chance to collaborate. You get to you've got behind the table directors, choreographers, artistic directors. These are all theater people who are invested in creating theater. And so you get to kind of share in a story with them. And I would say if you're in the room and you do a monologue or song and the director gives you an adjustment. They say, oh, can you actually do it a little bit more like this than the way you're doing it? Please, please, please don't take that as a critique on your work, because if they didn't think you were good, they wouldn't spend the time. Often it's about seeing, one, how do you take notes? Because it's one thing, people, we come in for a 2-minute audition and we're about to rehearse for a month together and perform this show for months. And they want to get a sense often of, how are you going to play in rehearsal? How are you going to work with others? And so often a note is just seeing, how do you collaborate? Or it might be shifting more in line with their vision of the show. Either way, it's in service of you being a part of the show and a part of that relationship, versus a critique on anything you've done. It really is, it's an invitation to play. So I suggest lean into it and play. Now, I recognize I say all of this, and a lot of our auditioning is, virtual now. It's not in person, which comes with its own challenges, but also some really great things. The nice thing about recorded auditions or Zoom audition, well, often right now the standard is there's a lot of recorded auditions, and then callbacks might be more Zoomed. With a recorded audition, you get to schedule it on your own terms. You can take as many takes as you like. You can also, often you can pick your reader. I have a good friend who we're also in a COVID bubble together. He lives down the street, and I trust him as an actor. And so I know that he's going to set me up for success as a scene partner. And if you don't have someone around you who you feel that with, I will say at the beginning of COVID, sometimes I would set up my computer and have my scene partner via Zoom and then record separately. There are so many workarounds in that domain. The challenge, I think, with recorded auditions, which I will say I think are going to be more of a norm as we go forward. They were already part of the system, often for like an initial audition, but also as we look at how theaters can travel for auditions. I've worked in Florida 5 times now. Yeah, 5 times. And each time it's because the casting directors, the artistic directors came to New York. They can't do that in the same way now. You'd have to quarantine for 10 days. You can't just come in and do an audition and leave. So there's going to be a lot more, even as theaters reopen. I still think there's going to be a lot which is done, which is recorded. And I like to think about, how can I make theatrical choices in a film medium? Because we're still ultimately going to be doing theater. And I kind of, my framing is, how can I think outside the box while playing in this very specific box? And again, in the same way with a live audition, it's so limiting to stand in the middle of the floor on the X and present forward. It also has that same catch, with filmed auditions. A lot of people will go into almost Zoom presentation mode of sitting in the middle and presenting their material. I would suggest, even in a recorded audition, find ways to make it 3-dimensional. You often have to work a little harder because it is this 2-dimensional. And I think about the kind of tools I look at, because ultimately my goal here is, how can I serve the story? How can I tell this story as effectively as possible? So I'll look at, okay, how am I framing my audition? If I'm guessing a scene and it's a very intimate scene, I'm telling someone I love them for the first time. They chose that. I always think, why did they choose that scene? Well, they chose that scene because that character needs to have that brave vulnerability in that moment, and they want to see that the actor can handle that. Well, I don't want to, in that scene, be like framed so far away that they can't really see my eyes. For that one, I'm going to want to have a much more intimate shot. Versus, I just had a audition last week for a play about the first woman to ever cycle around the world. And it's a 5-person play. Everyone plays, it's 5 women. They play a whole range of characters of all ages, genders, nationalities. And I was playing a 8-year-old woman learning to ride a bicycle for the first time. And so it was a scene with physical comedy, which, I figured out how I could make that work on a chair and balance it. But for that, I'm going to do a wider shot because that's going to allow me to do the physical comedy. Because why did they choose that scene? They chose that scene because they want to know that that actor can handle physical comedy. So if I'm doing a scene just like this, I'm not actually going to be able to show that. So I think about how can I frame it so I can serve the story. I think about how can I also shift, again, get out, finding ways to get out of Zoom presentations, sit in the middle, it tells a very different story when you find different angles and when you find different locations in your screen. And for me, it helps because it makes me feel like I'm not presenting a world, I'm playing in the world. So that's fun. I also like to play with eyeline. Again, that standard is that not looking at the cameras the same way you wouldn't look at the director, is slightly off so I can still see your face fully. But if I'm having multiple characters, let's say Fred is a character who intimidates me, I might have his eyeline up here versus, little Timmy's there. And so finding ways, and I will say I often in my apartment, I'll put sticky notes on the walls if I'm doing scenes with multiple characters. So that I know that every time I go back to talking to Ted, he's up here, Timmy, stop it, Ted, what are you doing? Ted. So you know exactly where your viewpoints are and you can kind of go back to them. Again, it's all about finding a three-dimensional story to tell. And I would say with recorded auditions, there is an added kind of mental game too, because with an in-person audition, you go in, you do your audition, and you get to leave, and you're not even you can sometimes you can play back moments of it and assess it, but with a recorded audition, you have to watch yourself back and pick which takes, and it can be very easy in a way to get kind of critical of oneself in a way that is not helpful. And so I always ask myself, one, I like to put on my director hat. I literally think of myself like, this is me as a director. And how would I want a director to speak to me? Because often that's a lot more kinder and a lot more productive than the voice we have internally. And I ask myself, am I speaking in service of the story or in critique of it? In service, for instance, I can look at it, the scene, and I'm watching back and I say, ooh, okay, I closed off my body in that moment when I meant to be saying I love you, and that didn't allow me to effectively tell that story, versus me going, bad Katrina, why did you get tense? And then I'm just going to get tense again. So finding how am I serving the story? Because then it takes off the work of it being on you, and can be a lot more productive conversation. Talking about kind of mental practices with auditions, I think it's worth pointing out that, audition nerves are a very, very real thing. And having them does not make you any less talented or professional. For me, it's not about, because for me, I think, often audition nerves just show you care, ultimately. And the trick is not letting the nerves run the show. I like to think of myself kind of driving on I'm on my little audition road trip. My nerves are allowed in the back seat, but they're not allowed to take the wheel. And that's on me. And I think it's going back to your skill set, your technique to stop it from taking the wheel. I know for me, when I get nervous, my tempo of nerves is very, very fast. And then that cuts off my breathing. And so for me, okay, I know my tempo of nerves is fast. How do I slow down my heartbeat? I do box breaths, which is you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, you release for 4. And I keep doing that until I feel that heart rate come down. I also know that I get my brain, I go to my brain instead of to my body. So making sure I am warmed up, that I am fully stretched, especially in really finding my feet beforehand. I am known for doing a lot of weird squats right before an audition. Whatever you need to do that's going to help you go into the room as successful as possible. They don't know what you did to get there. I also say that, the more prepared I am, the less nervous I'm going to be. And when I say prepared, I mean, one, knowing the material, if they've given you a scene, really knowing it. The standard convention is that you have your scene, you have your paper in hand. You don't need to be fully memorized for an audition. However, you don't want to be spending the entire time with your head in the page. That's not serving you. It's there to support you if you need it, but it shouldn't be a crutch to fully rely on. But so knowing the scene, knowing not how the scene functions in the play. Why did they pick the scene? What is the arc of this scene? Where is my character in the story? Make sure you fully read the play, not just the scene you're auditioning with, because often the context of it and how it is framed is going to be so important. Know who's behind the table. If I'm auditioning for Ivo Von Hove, it's going to be very different to Bartlett Sher, and making sure you know who these people are and what their styles are. Because I like to think of, again, coming back to you are the solution in the room. I want to, when I go into a room, kind of marry who I am and my take on it with who they are and what is the show. And when I go into audition for, because I do quite a wide range of shows. I do a lot of Shakespeare, contemporary drama, musicals. I also, have a quite youthful appearance. So I'm often called in for younger roles, and finding ways how I'm going to audition for Sally Bowles and Cabaret. I'm going to bring in an energy of myself that is different than when I'm going in for Molly Astor and Peach and the Starcatcher. And they're both me. They're just different flavors of me. And so knowing kind of the expectations of the show and knowing who is behind the table is really helpful, and doing that research there. I would say I keep an audition journal. I write down every time I go in for audition, I write down the date, I write what I was auditioning for, what material I did, whether it was a monologue, a song, sides. I write, any impressions, how did it go, who was in the room. That way I can go back to it and I can say, oh, last time I went in for that person, they really liked when I lent into kind of dark humor. Let me find that in this piece too. And kind of making informed decisions, which just based on kind of noting things down. And, I keep that log, and I can always, when I go in for a team, I look back, when was the last time I went in for them? I would say it's also can be useful in getting auditions. I realize I haven't even talked about how we get auditions, which is a useful thing to know. So I would say there's almost 4 types of auditions. There's an open call where you get up early and you sign up and you claim your slot. And a lot of points, especially when you're non-union, that's a lot of summer theater. And I, would get up at 5 a.m. and wait outside the building, and you sign up and you get your 2 minutes, and it can be a hustle, but it is rewarding when it pays off. So there's open calls, there's an agent. If you have an agent, they can submit you for a show. Now, I will say I've never had an agent, and while they are very incredibly useful, I don't want anyone to ever think that they are the be all end all, or that you can't do this stuff on your own. Sometimes, yes, it does take some extra hustling, but these auditions are accessible to you if you actually look and if you do the research. And even right before, the day before Broadway shut down, I was in final callbacks for a Broadway show, and that I got without an agent because I showed up. And I actually showed up in an audition where they were seeing, it was pretty open because they had 3 days of auditions, and a lot of people assumed they're probably not looking. It's a Broadway show, they'll have appointments, and people kind of they didn't take it seriously. And I said, this is my opportunity to go find this casting team for a show which I'm right for. And if you're right for it, you're right for it. And so while an agent can give you access, they're not the stamp of approval, they're not the be all end all. So open calls, agent submissions, um, there's you submitting. So that's sending an email. And again, in that case, looking back at, what has this team done before? Have I gone in for them before? I know there's one casting team, I haven't actually booked a show with them, but if I'm submitting, I say, hi there, hope you're well. You called me back for this show. So I'm not suddenly an unknown commodity. There's a connection there. Because often this industry, a lot of it's about trust. That casting director, they only have certain number of slots in the day. They're trying to look good for the directors, the artistic teams too. Often it can be a risk, to take a chance on something unknown. And so you build trust every time you audition and do if you tell an effective story, whether or not you book the show or not, you gain some trust. And that's half of like making connections here. I think of an audition in a way, it's kind of a little bit like a first date. It's, you meet each other, you get to feel each other out a bit. You're never going to go full on launch into marriage without that callback, without that second date. And so that almost in a way takes off some pressure on the initial audition. It's just like a getting to know each other. But along the way, you make those connections and you build that trust. Because they want to know that you can sustain a long run, that you're going to be pleasant to work with on a 10 out of 12 tech day when you're in that theater for a really long day. And so trust really goes a long way. And it's one of those things, it takes time to build up, but can be broken pretty quickly. So really making sure you're treating everyone around you with respect, that you're showing up fully prepared, that you're not wasting anyone's time. Because time is a luxury in this business. And then the fourth way of auditioning is there's something called an EPA, or an equity principal audition. And if you become a member of the union, the theatre union, which is Actors Equity Association, one of the benefits of it is that you have access to auditions. And so when theatres come to town, they are required to have this union audition, and I can sign up online, or if I don't get an online slot, I can go in person, and I'm guaranteed a slot. And if you are non-union, you are still able to go to those auditions. You get seen time permitting. If there is space after they've seen union members, you then get seen. And I would say my journey to becoming a union member was because I went to one of those auditions as a non-union member. I got there really early. It was quite busy, but they were only casting, they were doing a full season. This was Florida Repertory, but they cast most of the roles, and they were looking for things that were really specific. And they wanted someone who could do a British accent, knew some ASL, and could play piano. And I was like, great, that's me, haha. And yes, go for it. Exactly, in less busy cities, because you get seen. You're lower down on the list, but if they have time, they will see you. And I got seen at this audition. I got seen right at the end of the day, and went through callbacks, and it was a show that came out of nowhere, and it was a really beautiful play. It was called Tribes. It's by Nina Rain, and it's a family drama in which the son is deaf. And it's, for me, the play is all about communication and its limitations. No matter, you've got this hearing family who, I would say, the deaf son listens better than any of the hearing siblings, and communicates way better. And it's a really beautiful piece. And, I went to this audition not even knowing if I would get seen. And I did, and got called back, and they flew me to Florida, and I spent 2 months doing this beautiful play in a black box space in the round, so you can feel the audience around you for every show, which is its own wild experience, but so rewarding. And from doing that show, I then had an audition for Orlando Shakespeare, and the artistic directors are friends, and so he asked about me. And I was very fortunate that director said, you'd be an idiot not to hire her. And so then that led to that job, and that got me points, and that got me credits, which are their own, version of trust in a way that you can see other people who've trusted you. So it's half of it is just showing up prepared, showing it up as an opportunity. A lot of times, I would say in New York, in the busy seasons, you sometimes have 4 or 5 auditions a day and you're kind of bouncing around, and it can be easy to switch off a bit and just kind of treat it as business. But I promise, if you show up, it really does pay off. And it's a much more fun experience. I would say find also material that you love, that you're comfortable doing in different ways. I always find it a fun challenge of like, how can I shape this monologue so it's a bit more appropriate for this show? It's all about keeping it in the realm of the show, but you're not going to learn a new monologue for every single play you go in for. So sometimes it's about smartly repurposing pieces you have and finding ways to like be open and be curious in them. Because a lot of theater, often there's a lot of theaters doing the same shows. And so you'll wind up doing that monologue a bunch of times and finding, is it still serving me? Am I still having fun with it? How can I use this to my best advantage? So I've rambled on for a long time. I'd love to know your questions. If anyone wants to come off mute and pipe in. Any question is good. Yes, great, Sierra.
Okay, so my most like anxiety comes from walking in the room. I did an audition where I walked in the room and they said nothing to me the entire time. How do you get over that?
Yeah, because I've had audition rooms. Literally, there's one guy who just like he's permanently eating a sandwich. I don't like every time I've auditioned for him, he's just like sit and he doesn't look up. I think one, knowing that it isn't it, even as it's the wacky thing about auditioning is that it is so inherently personal, and yet in so many ways it isn't. um and so that person not looking up, it's not about you, it is not a judgment on you. And I don't think, and it's not your job to like push him to make him look up. I wait until they look up to start my piece, because then I have their attention. Um, I play piano, accordion, and ukulele, and I was going in for a piano-based show, and I sat at the piano, and the casting director was talking as if I wasn't in the room, which like can feel really hurtful. And I waited. I didn't say anything. I wasn't rude, but I waited until he finished his conversation so I could share my story. But yes, I totally resonate with it. It can be hard to do something that acting is inherently personal. It is your voice, it is your body, it is your heart on the line. And when you're going into a space that is less than welcoming, less than supportive, that makes it so much harder. And I would say it's an act of bravery to share in spite of that. And I think, clocking in, like, your worth and your value is not determined by that person. So really going back to that material and being like, I am going to share this story I love. Maybe the director will respond, maybe he won't. Does that change how good I am at it? No. Does it change how much I love it? And so if your aim in that room isn't, I think the danger often is that we think our aim is to impress casting, to impress the director. If that person is cut off like that, they're not there to play that game. And you lose your own power in making it that game. But finding, right beforehand, again, they don't know what's happened right before that room. If doing some breathing, doing some yoga, if pushing against the wall as much as you can, shaking things out, whatever is going to serve you so that when you walk into that room, you feel in control of that space, because it is your space. For that time, it is your time to tell the story. And that is a gift you are sharing with them, but you don't ultimately need their approval for it. Does that make sense? Yes, Austin.
So I'm a huge fan of like voiceover acting and that kind of stuff. And so, what were some of the steps you took to get your voiceover jobs?
Let me give you a little tour. Let's see if I can do this. Can we see my booth? Probably not, actually. Wait, let's see. I have a booth in my apartment, is what we're going to see. So I don't know how much you can see, but might not be able to see that because I'm in a laptop. But so I do audiobooks and also commercials, and I just finished doing an animation project with Adult Swim that was a lot of fun and thoroughly bizarre. So I will say I kind of stumbled into voiceover. I'm a big Shakespeare nerd, and a friend of mine hosts a drunken Shakespeare evening once a month, and it's at a bar, and we do monologues, and it's kind of like the idea of it is almost like drunk karaoke, but instead of karaoke, everyone's doing Shakespeare monologues. And so I knew a community from that, and one of them knew someone who was the casting director for WebMD's voiceover department for the infomercials and industrials, and they had recorded they needed a middle-aged British man, so clearly me, and they'd recorded this industrial, and then the client was like, he doesn't sound British enough, and they had to re-record it, and he was talking to my friend at the time, who I knew from doing drunken Shakespeare of all things, and he was like, he doesn't even need to be male or middle-aged, we just need a Brit, and he was like, well, I know a Brit, and so then I got my first experiences in a studio. And then I wound up, for me, everyone's got a very different path, but that made me more aware of like, okay, this is an industry I'm interested in. I love, for me, I love language. And the cool thing about voiceover is it's pure language, it's language and voice. And like how fun to play. And I am someone who leans into different aspects of my voice, even at Creed, working there, I know, I'm doing a 14-year-old Victorian girl. I'm going to be, I'm Molly Astor, and I'm going to be up here, and this is how we go, versus Audrey is down here and is New York. And I always love the flexibility of that. So I took a class, I wound up taking a class in the city, which the last week they invited in a couple agents, and we did commercial copy for them. I would say a lot of voiceover, commercial is often where the money is, and so that's where like agents lean towards, and so I met an agent there, and we did a kind of trial period together, and they're great. They sent me out for animation and for commercial. Audiobooks are a separate world, I will say. With commercials and animation, a lot of it is very agent centric, while with theatre, you can absolutely find opportunities. It can be hard in voiceover without an agent. Um, there are certain sites which they call pay to play sites, where you basically pay a subscription, you get access. There are some problematic things with that, and it doesn't serve everyone. And it's not something I would like instantly be like, drop that money and do it, because it's a risk and investment there. But yes, agents often are. And so finding even like who are your local agents, or looking up local talent, there's what's it called? iSpot, I think. Yes, iSpot.tv is a great resource if you're interested in voiceover. It basically shows every single commercial that is which is on the air right now. And so you can get a sense really of like what is being produced, what styles, because I would say the voiceover market does shift. Even in doing commercials this past year, there's a very different voice they want from the start of the pandemic to now. The start of the pandemic, every commercial, they wanted warm tones to make sure that you knew you were okay in these uncertain times. Versus now, a lot of the commercials are like, we want it conversational. We want it to feel like people have been through something. We don't want to be because people don't want to be sold something. So there are trends. So making sure you are aware of any trends in that world are very helpful. And looking up who your local like radio personalities and who are their agents, because agents are often the way. And then if you're interested in audiobooks, which I love doing audiobooks, and I will say audiobooks I'm newer to. It came out of the pandemic happened, and my next 3 plays were cancelled, and I was itching to share stories. And that's the cool thing about audiobooks is you can safely do it. I do it in my closet and sit and edit at home. And there's a great website. The big things for audiobooks, it's everything's done at home. So making sure, actually, with either commercial or audiobooks, is having a good setup. You have a microphone, I can see, making sure that your room has some like foam for like to reduce echoes. That is, soundproofing so that it's quiet enough. Because right now a lot of things are being done from home. It used to be I just auditioned from here and then I would record at a separate studio. Now they patch into my system and we just do it right here. So a big thing is making sure you have a good space. Often the space is even more important than the mic. And then audiobooks, check out acx.com. It's an awesome site. It's partnered with Audible, and you can look up, you can literally make a profile audition right there. It can be actually great practice just to, try out some auditions, see what's there. You can filter based on, age, gender, interests, nonfiction, fiction. So that can be a cool resource too. Any other questions? Yes, Shauna and Murphy.
Hello. I would love to go to London and try to find work in London. That's something I've really been considering recently. And this is a very broad question, but is it like what I've never been to London, so this is a great option, but is the theater scene up there, down there, over there, kind of across there, where like the same as New York, different? Is it comparable in any way? Like what's kind of the scene like over there?
So, I mean, one, if you just look at what's being produced, there's much more plays on the West End than there are Broadway. There are proportionally more musicals than plays. They also, I think of actually the West End, I will say personally, I'm a fan of the regional theatre scene. I think there's often, in America, I think there's a lot more risks that are taken, and there's sometimes a lot of flashiness that happens to the plays on Broadway. I think often because they're trying to compete with the musicals on Broadway, and then it becomes like very produced. I think they're less, it's more playful in that imaginative sense often on the English theatre scene. I will say that the auditioning scene is very different. It's very old school. It's very like, you have an agent, you often audition at the theater itself, which I think is so cool. And fun thing is that they do, if you're ever, this is true actually with English directors, they spend a lot more time with you. It's a very, like in New York often, or like even a lot of places, it can be very like wham bam cattle call. In England, often they will talk to you. I was in callbacks for Trevor Nunn and we spent 30 minutes just talking about life and art before we even did the monologue, because that's what, and that's very standard, because they're like, they want to get to know you and who you are and what you're going to be like in the rehearsal process. So it can be a very intimate experience, but it is also a little bit tough to break into because it is agent centric, and you have to, there's the link, with having the ability to work there. I'm very lucky. I have dual citizenship. So that can be a process. The people I know who have had success from America doing that path, they went in through an education program, got a student visa, and in England, if you go to a drama school, you automatically get your union membership, which then kind of fed into like being easier to get immigration, because you're like, I'm already, part of a union here. So it can be more of a process than just like get on a plane and go. But it definitely is doable. It's just, you know, often the biggest thing is those logistics of just being able to work there. And it can be hard. While it is very agent oriented system, it's hard to get an agent if you can't work there, because ultimately, you know, an agent only makes agents, I should say, if an agent ever comes to you and says, like, asks for, like, says that you need to pay something to be a client, run away. It's a scam. Agents will never ask you. You don't pay an agent. An agent only gets money when you book a job. They get a percentage. They get 10% in this country, 15 in England. Managers can be 10 to 15%, but either way, you never pay an agent. They get a cut of your work. Just important to say. So yeah, so the citizenship thing can be tough, but if you can, like, often the educational route, it works well for people, and that can be a way to introduce to agents as well. But it is a cool scene. I'm from London myself, so I do have a lot of love there. Any other questions? Yes, Ian.
I don't know how much this particularly pertains to auditioning, but when perusing your resume, I couldn't help but notice the competitive eating champion sitting at the bottom. And I was wondering, A, maybe a little background story, and B, why put that on your actor's resume?
Do you know that the fact that you raised it, though, is why I put it on my actor's
Just
resume?
an eye catcher, kind of?
Because if someone is, because it's at the bottom, it's under my special skills, it's a couple words. If they're reading that far, they're kind of interested anyway. They're taking a look at my resume, and then it opens up a conversation. And especially, as I said, in these, it's often like you go in, you do a minute and a half monologue, and you leave, in and out. And finding that in-person connection, because then you also build trust, can be so important. And so I will say every single audition that has asked me about my competitive eating skills, I've at least gotten a callback for. And so, but the story behind that is I did a contest and I had 43 grilled cheese sandwiches in 15 minutes. Thank you. Actually, fun story, when I was auditioning for Tribes at Florida Rap, as I was about to leave my audition, the artistic director was like, wait, I just have like one question for you. And I was like, oh, sure, shoot. And she was like, so like, what do you put in your grilled cheese? I was like, oh, no, I don't make them. I eat them. And then when I got called back, as soon as I walked in the door, the director was in that time, and she was like, ask her how many grilled cheese she had. Ask her. And then when they were casting, they kept going, where's grilled cheese girl's resume? Which I appreciate, because usually I'm British girl, which isn't a statement on anything I've done. I just am British. So yeah, so grilled cheese, it opens up. And also now, whenever I do an out of town show, there's usually a local eating contest. So I've won a German pretzel eating contest. My name is on a placard in Florida because I had 3 BLTs, 3 tuna salad, 3 chicken salad, 3 beef and provolone, 3 ham and cheddar sandwiches stacked up on top, and I have the record time overall and the only woman to have completed it. So like, it's a fun challenge, especially like I'm 5'4", 100 pounds. Like they don't see it coming. So again, it's like it opens up a conversation. I smile when I talk about it. So so it shows personality too. So but like that's why I have it on my resume. You know, everything else on my resume is strictly, here are the shows I've done. Here's the training I've done. My special skills are the instruments I play, my dance background. And that's just like a fun little whimsy. And so I wouldn't say like, it doesn't necessarily serve you to go too wild in that department, but a couple words, they're not going to look at that and be like, oh, who is this unprofessional, minx? But it can open a conversation if they're open to it, which is why I have it.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I know some of you may have to start getting to a 10 o'clock class soon, but while we have Katrina, like feel free if you do have a 10 o'clock to get off, but while we do have Katrina, are there any more questions?
Yes. Avery Emma. How'd you say your name?
Oh, Rima, the last name.
Rima. Great.
My question kind of just had to do with slating. I always feel like if I go in and I mess up my slate, I get like I'm off the rest of the time. It feels like in my head. And I was just wondering if you had any like tips when it came to like slating and kind of just like that first introduction.
Sure. When you say you mess up your slating, what do you mean by that?
Like if I, I'll go over it a million times in my head, but even if I just go up there and I'm like, hello, my name is Avery Rima, and today I will be doing this, or something like that. And then I'll just like get in my head for the entire, rest of the time. So any tips or tricks when it came to that?
I would say firstly with a slate, I think it serves you to think of it as a conversation versus, presenting material. It's not your monologue. It's just like a introduction. And so, it's not necessarily something you need to rehearse over and over, but just to kind of, hi there, my name's this, and I'm about to do that. And that takes off a lot of pressure on it, I would say. And then remember that you have the power to reset at any point. I always think the meaning of inspiration comes from breath. And if you can, let's say you do, something doesn't go as you planned it to go, really taking that next breath to release it and then just get back on track. Because you can never, in acting, you can't spend you can only be in the present. You can't spend that moment thinking about what the past was, what could have been, and you can't be gearing up for the future thing. And so finding a way to release on breath, and every breath is literally an opportunity to check back into yourself and get back on track. Because there's no such thing as an audition that is like unsavable. I think often those auditions are because when an actor does just kind of say, well, I failed that, so just gonna, like, you have the power to reclaim that audition, and no singular moment is going to define audition. I know I've watched auditions where like someone flubbed a note, and it's so interesting because you can see who in that next moment kind of is like punishing themselves for it, and who just keeps on going and tells the story. And by the end, I don't remember that note. I remember the whole story. And so, you make a hiccup, we're human. The people behind the table are human. I'm human. The number of times, I say words that are kind of mishmashes of like other words, and, we're all human. And if you can find a way to find the humor and the grace in that, and a trick I use, because I am someone who I get a little bit perfectionisty, and I think it can be a trap sometimes to imagine if you're like, this is how I want the audition to go, and then if anything differs from it, then it's like, I did bad. A trick I use, I call it the fascinating trick. Instead of going like, ugh, I totally ruined that moment, what was I doing? I go, fascinating, that came out that way. Okay, well, maybe next time I won't do that. Like, I treat myself a little bit like a wacky science experiment, because then there's no judgment. I can learn from it. And then it's not, it's just like fascinating that you thought that was a sentence that should come out of your mouth, Katrina. Maybe next time, let's not do that. Versus like, why did you do that? You ruined everything. Can be because, we're all, I think, embracing the humanity of an audition versus it is a formal presentation. Yes, there are certain rules, and constructs, but like you can actually push up against them more than you realize. And, if you fully bring yourself in the room with wacky mess ups and all, it can actually even be endearing as long as you embrace it. Yes, fascinating.
Yeah, it tells you what kind of person you're auditioning too from the other side of the table. If they have a flub and they're just able to be like, oh, that was weird. And just like, and embrace it. You're like, oh, that's the kind of actor I want to work with. not someone who's going to be like, whipping themselves.
And because like we're in live theater, the number of odd things and mess ups and things that go on stage, but I need to know that at the end of the day, you're going to keep the show going. We all sometimes we miss a line, we forget our blocking. These are human things. They will happen, especially in the long run of a show. But I need to know, I need to trust that person's going to keep the show going. And you can do that in the audition too. And and the way you move past it shows your professionalism, not the mistake in itself.
Oh, Katrina, thank you so much for doing this. I mean,
Yeah.
listening to you is always so inspiring, whether it's in an audition, in a rehearsal room, at the bar, or like in a Zoom call. It's just always so wonderful. Your perspective on things is just so human, which I really, really appreciate. So thank you so much for speaking with us today. It really meant a lot.
Oh, it's really a treat to meet everyone. And if anyone has any questions at any point, like I'm always here as a resource. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. But it was like a pleasure to meet all of you. And like, honestly, I'm always here if you have a question.
Well, thank you so much. That is so generous. And I think it's just great, like getting to connect with you, because we're all the way out here in Western Colorado, and that is sometimes out here, it can feel a little isolated from, the vast, what we think of as the cultural and urban centers of our country and everything where the jobs are really sort of located. So thank you so much for doing this. It really means a lot.
Of course. Well, stay safe, everyone. And awesome to meet you.
Thank you. And have a great rest of your day, Katrina.
You
Thanks
too.
for spending your morning with us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.